Continuing in the book of Psalms, we're in chapter 65. There will be silence before you and praise in Zion, O God, and to you the vow will be performed. Now, whenever we see Zion in prophetic context, as we've mentioned before, it's referring to the church. And to God, the vow would be performed. And it is very likely that this vow is the vow of the sacrifice of Christ. You who hears prayer, to you all men come. Iniquities prevail against me. As for our transgression, you do forgive them. So this is Christ praying, and he speaks of his people. You forgive them. How blessed is the one whom you choose and bring near to you to dwell in your courts. We shall be satisfied with the goodness of your house. Now, this first is Christ who is brought into God's courts. And we who are in him are blessed, satisfied with the goodness of his house, which is his church, his holy temple, 2 Corinthians 6:16. By awesome deeds you answer us in righteousness, O God of our salvation, you who are the trust of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest sea. Now, when we look at the word sea in prophetic contexts, and even in non-prophetic or historical context, sea refers to the Gentiles. And so there's these awesome deeds. How? By awesome deeds you answer us in righteousness. They were praying for the kingdom of God to come. You answer us in righteousness, O God of our salvation. So those are the awesome deeds. Christ bringing his righteousness to us through his death and resurrection. You who are the trust of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest sea, indicating that his salvation reaches not just to Jews and Israelites, but to the Gentiles. Who established the mountains by his strength, being girded with might. Who does still the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, and the tumult of the peoples. So here we see apocalyptic or metaphorical language referring to the Gentiles. When we see the stilling of the seas as they were on the ship with Christ and the storm was about to overtake them and he was sleeping, they were worried they were going to drown. And Jesus said to the wind and the waves, "Peace, be still." And immediately they were still. And they said, "What manner of man is this, where the sea and the waves obey him?" And so here it says, you still the roaring of the seas. That is the anger of those nations who had troubled Israel. He would still them. And so that's what Christ's stilling those waters was telling the disciples. Remember that passage in Psalm 65. This is now going to be fulfilled through the gospel going first to the Jews and the Israelites and then out to the Gentiles to calm and still their hearts. You still the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, and the tumult of the peoples. And they who dwell in the ends of the earth stand in awe of your signs. You make the dawn and the sunset shout for joy. You visit the earth and cause it to overflow. You greatly enrich it. The stream of God is full of water. This is obviously speaking of salvation through the living waters. Christ, you prepare their grain, for you prepare the earth or the land. You water its furrows abundantly, you settle its ridges, you soften it with showers, and you bless its growth. You have crowned the year with your bounty, and your paths drip with fatness. Again, this is just speaking of the kingdom of God. There is no leanness in that kingdom. The pastures of the wilderness drip, and the hills gird themselves with rejoicing. Hills, mountains, hills, speaking of God's people. The meadows are clothed with flocks, and the valleys are covered with grain. They shout for joy. Yes, they sing. Again, just metaphorical language used to describe the people of God in Psalm 65.